And death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to a special pre-recorded edition of Ancient Faith Today Live. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're listening with us. Obviously, we won't be taking calls, but we'd love to hear from you after the show airs. So you can send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. And remember, you can also send us a text to 412-206-5012. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to pass them along to our guests tonight. So let's get started. It is sometimes uncommonly known that people who are Christians are, unbeknownst to them, having a Christian of Christianity, and that is the incarnation and the resurrection. So some examples that we might know about, or we might have heard, or maybe we've even thought about these things. For instance, when somebody dies, somebody might say, heaven has gained a new angel, or they might say, they have been released from the shackles of the body. This idea is so pervasive in our culture. Today, we might even be facing a kind of new Gnosticism, where people are changing, or think they are changing, their gender, transgenderism, the belief that you are really something outside of your body, that your body and your gender have nothing to do with you. Heretical teachers, abundant today in many forms of charismatic Protestantism, who claim to have received some special revelation from God which contradicts the Holy Scriptures, are certainly Gnostics. So today, we're going to discuss a very important book that's just coming out, published by Ancient Faith Publishing, and it's called Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a manual for recovering Gnostics. The author is Robin Phillips. Robin has a master's in history from King's College in London. He is a master of library science from the University of Oklahoma. He lived many years in England. He was and he is currently the managing editor for Salvo magazine and Touchstone magazine. He is also the author of and contributor to of the book Pain, Suffering, and Resilience: Orthodox Christian Perspectives. So we're going to discuss his book today, and along with us on the show is Dr. Phillip Cary. Dr. Cary is the chair of the philosophy department at Eastern University, which is outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Robin and Philip, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, glad to join you.
I'm so glad that you are both here with us. Robin, I want to turn to you and tell us a little bit about your spiritual journey, how you came to Orthodoxy, but I know that part of that journey is your kind of discovering of the beliefs that you had about creation and how you came to Orthodox Christianity and how you clarified this idea of the goodness of creation. Tell us about your spiritual journey.
Yes. Well, I had grown up as I'd been raised as a Christian. My parents are both very faithful evangelicals, and so I was always interested in the spiritual life, but I always struggle with how to reconcile my relationship with Jesus with my love of all the beautiful things in the world. And so, because I grew up around books, because my dad was an author and an editor and a publisher and owned a Christian bookstore. So wow. I just had this very rich upbringing with all these books, and I was attracted to books about philosophy and history and poetry, especially with my love for beauty. I kind of verged into a kind of romanticism. So I would like walk meditatively through the woods with the poetry of Keats, for example, and as I grew into early adulthood, there was kind of like these two tracks in my life. There was the kind of like the romanticism and my love for beautiful things on the one hand, mm-hmm. and then there was a very kind of intense evangelicalism. I was very scrupulous and hard on myself. So I was attracted to very kind of severe forms of Protestantism. So, for example, I went to a fundamentalist Bible school that was part of a community that was started by this man who believed he was the second Elijah, and that his little group had special revelations for bringing God's kingdom to the earth. And this guy was arrested for manslaughter, but his community continued, and that's where I went to learn about the Bible. And it was, the emphasis there was on not being worldly and repudiating the things of this world. So when I would read authors that had a more holistic approach, like Catholic authors, for example, Thomas Howard, I read his book, Christ the Tiger, while I was there, and Peter Kraft, Catholic author. I would almost like, that would seem like a temptation. I remember even once I asked somebody for prayer when I was, because I saw some of these authors as like a temptation, because my life was kind of on two tracks. On the one hand is my spiritual life over here, but then on the other hand, I have my love for beauty and literature and art and poetry and philosophy. So my spiritual journey has really been, how do I bring these things together? And sometimes that involved like reframing how I was even asking the question. Right. And so I don't want to take up too
that's okay. But I appreciate that very much. Robin, let me ask you before we go to Dr. Cary, what attracted you to this teacher that said, he was the second coming of Elijah or something? What was it about his teaching that was so attractive to you? Because it seems, I'm always fascinated by this, where someone gets involved in a kind of sect like that. And you said you had this romanticism for beauty, for poetry, and yet you were struggling with this scrupulosity, keeping the letter of the law. So what attracted you? Was it because he was sort of denying that the creation was something to be engaged in? Was it that, he denied this? What was it that was so attractive about him or his teaching to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. His name was Frank Sanford, and he was already dead by the time I went to the Bible school that was based on his teachings. But, the thing that attracted me was, I wanted to go to college and study music and philosophy, and I actually got accepted at a university. But I had a fear of the world. I had a fear I'm going to go to college and I'm going to lose my faith like other peers of mine did. And so if I go to this really tight Bible school, it's going to be like a stepping stone for me into the scary world of adulthood. And I was scared. I was scared of the world at the same time as I was attracted to the beautiful things of this world. So this kind of fear drove me to this place that felt safe. It was it only had when I was there, only had 20 students so that they could have really tight supervision and lots and lots of rules. But I felt safe. But I was so divided that eventually I just exploded and went crazy and joined a group in England that was the complete opposite extreme. So I've been kind of on this journey for a long time.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of people suffer from this contradiction where you are you admire the world, but you are sort of scared of the world, scared of going out and venturing into the world? Do you think that this is prevalent?
I think it is, and I'd like to hear from Dr. Phillip Cary because I know he works with a lot of students. But I've found it very prevalent in other people I talk to, and that's why I wrote this book, to be able to give, because this is the sort of teaching that I wish I have had access to in my youth.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. Well, Dr. Cary, let's talk to you. You are a teacher at Eastern University. You're the chair of the philosophy department.
That's
and
right.
Just going on what was said there, do you think that this, I know we're going to go back to the issue of this kind of popular Gnosticism, right? Mm-hmm. But I do want to focus in on the idea of being fearful of engagement. Is it because of the virtual world that students today are so immersed in that they feel like they can't actually, the saying today is, hey, go touch some grass, right? Get out of your computers, get out of your head and go touch the physical world. Is this a problem? Are you seeing this?
Yeah, I am seeing that. On the other hand, I do think that what Robin was just describing is actually an older phenomenon, not dependent on the virtual world. You can see it in a lot of cults or sects, as you call them, right? In America especially, you get a lot of these little religious sects and cults, and usually at the center of them there's some powerful, charismatic personality, very strong personality, usually male, and the way that the cult is held together is with very, very strong social boundaries, so that if you step outside the boundaries of the cult, you feel like, oh no, I'm out in the world. The world is bad. I need to go back where I can be, approved of by whatever cult leader it is. And I think that sense of hugely strong social boundaries is a way is one of the things that makes you afraid of the world, afraid of going to college where you might learn some of the wrong things. Right. So one of the crucial things about, say, orthodoxy is there are boundaries, but you got to get the boundaries in the right place. What you want to exclude is heresy. You don't want to exclude the beauty of the world. And orthodoxy, and both orthodoxy, large O and small o, is welcoming of the beauty of the world, but not welcoming of heresy. And that's the right way to draw boundaries. Whereas in these cults, everything other than what the cult leader says is heresy, and that's essentially the world itself becomes heresy.
Well, let's talk about that and explore that a little bit between the two of you. And again, we're talking with Robin Phillips, who has authored a new book, which is available right now at store.ancientfaith.com, and it's called Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a Manual for Recovering Gnostics. And we're also talking with Dr. Phillip Cary. So let's explore this idea a little bit. Dr. Cary, you said that this idea that the world is bad. It's understandable in one way, is it not, where people are bombarded now with news of, the latest things are these mass shootings, these mass killings, where even children don't feel safe in their schools, where they fear for their lives. People are being killed in malls and churches. There is also the social change and the social upheaval, which is very causing a lot of instability in our politics, in our society. And then, of course, global issues of war, famine, poverty. The world seems like it is a rough place. It is a bad place. So, Robin, what does someone do with that information when they look at the world and they say, it looks like everything is bad and I just want out of it? How would you answer them? How is the world good in your view?
Yes. Well, that's a great question, because it depends what we mean when we say creation is good. And in a sense, I'm wanting to contest what we often mean when we say that. Often to say something is good just means I like that, or it's fun. And so when I say creation is good, sometimes people hear that as justifying a kind of hedonism or a consumerist approach. But when the church fathers talked about the goodness of creation, they meant that it was purposeful. It had a telos. It's moving towards a goal. And recognizing that is not only compatible with everything bad that's going on in the world, but we have to. We will go into despair if we don't have a sense of God's eschatological purpose for the world. So
very good.
Goodness is related to God's plan. God's plan is that this world is leading to renewed heavens and renewed earth, where there will be no more evil, where there will be no more mass shootings. And we have to keep that eschatological horizon in sight. And so a lot of my book is just walking through that Christian hope of a future. It's not a future where God disposes of the earth and we live in some immaterial realm. No, the Christian hope is that this earth, this physical planet, will be renewed to achieve its proper teleology.
Right.
I love it. Dr. Cary, how do you answer that question even to your young students who say, look at this. There is, the government is corrupt, right? Religion is corrupt. It's all bad. What do you say to them in response to the despair that Robin points out that people can have about the world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you use the word corrupt. In the old King James translation, which I think is more accurate, we have Paul saying in 1 Corinthians 15, this corruptible must put on incorruption. Corruptible is a good translation of a Greek term, which also becomes this Latin term corruptio, which means things going bad. Now, you can only say that things go bad if you have some kind of standard of what is good. So corruption means that some good thing has gone bad. But that means the goodness of the thing is primary. God does not make bad stuff. God makes good stuff that can go bad. And there's various ways that good things can be corrupted, but we can't even identify what the corruption is unless we have some notion of the good. A second thing that I think Robin was talking about is when you say creation is good, we're not just saying we like it or we desire it, because we can desire, our desires can be corrupt, right? We can desire the wrong things. We can desire things that are bad for us. Unhealthy people can have unhealthy desires, corrupt desires. So goodness is not just what we happen to desire, it's what is worthy of desire. And that's why Robin spoke of this thing, telos, which is a term from ancient philosophy, about the natural and appropriate and real goal of the goodness of things. God creates the world with a telos, which says, it's like, an acorn has a telos, which is to grow into an oak tree. It doesn't achieve its telos if the oak tree is sick or rotten or chopped down, right? So everything has a telos, a good toward which it's aimed. And that's what we should be desiring. And that means, to go beyond philosophy into theology, that the goodness of the world is a gift of God to us. And our problem is that we often have corrupt and disordered desires, and we don't want the gift in the form that God gives it to us. God gives us the gift of being male and female. And nowadays in our culture, many people don't want that gift. They find it not a desirable thing that fulfills their inherent telos or goal as human beings. They think, oh, that's something imposed on me by some kind of coercion. I want absolute free choice. I get to choose to be male or female or neither or something both or fluid in between, because bodies with their particular form and shape are an imposition. They're a coercion. Pregnancy is forced on people. Their forced birth is now the language being used to support abortion, right? So the male and female, the goodness of the gift of God becomes, in our culture, through a kind of perversity, something that we find burdensome and not desirable. But that's because our desires are corrupt and disordered.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I appreciate both of your contributions to that, because I think it helps people sort of frame what this book is all about. We're talking with the author of Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a manual for recovering Gnostics, Robin Phillips, and along with him, Dr. Phillip Cary of Eastern University. So, Robin, let's talk a little bit about the book itself. I know that you said in your introduction that you had gone through the spiritual journey, that you had a sort of romanticized a view of the world. You loved poetry, you loved walking out in the woods, but you were becoming involved in a religious expression that was somehow denying the world, yes? And that eventually brings you to Orthodox Christianity. What motivated you now to write the book? Do you feel that this idea of the denial of the goodness of creation is a problem in certain forms of Christianity as well as in the popular minds of people?
Yes, it is. It is. And one example of this is cremation, where after death, we just burn the body like we would burn junk. And people say, oh, yeah, it doesn't make any difference. You still go to heaven, so what's the big deal? Well, it's interesting that in Protestant churches that practice cremation, we see their funeral liturgies changing to, and I don't know what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but their funeral liturgies are now talking about the body as just a shell, and a death
celebration of life, right?
Exactly, yeah. So death is a kind of release, because there's the body that's the problem.
Yeah.
This is a kind of Neoplatonism, right, Dr. Cary?
Well, well, I think Gnosticism really is the best label for it. Platonism is philosophically a two-sided or a two-faced kind of thing. One side of Platonism says the physical world is inferior, but you could also say the physical world is inferior but good. I mean, say a Neoplatonist like Augustine will say, well, of course the physical world is inferior to God, but it's still good. But then you can take the dark side of this and say the inferiority means it's evil, and that's where you get Gnosticism from, right? The inferiority of the world, and above all, I think the vulnerability and corruptibility of the world. So the material world is corruptible because it can go bad, and it's vulnerable to evil. And one impulse that the Gnostics have is to escape that vulnerability and corruptibility, not by awaiting the incorruptibility that clothes our corruptibility, as Paul says, right? This corruptible body gets clothed in an incorruptible gift of eternal life from Jesus Christ. That's the Orthodox view. The Gnostic view is we need to escape this corruptibility. I want to escape my body, says the Gnostic, because it's a form of vulnerability. It can be hurt. It can be wounded. It has a sexual identity which is not the identity that I chose for myself, and I want my free choice to be determining everything. And then you get this essentially this hatred of the body. You get a transgender movement, which is essentially a form of mutilation that young people are thinking that they actually want. So our problem is that we don't see that the form of the world as God gave it to us is actually a good thing. Yeah, but instead, here's one way of connecting with the previous thing. If you're part of this cult in some Protestant circles, right, and you have those strong social boundaries, and anything outside the cult is the world, and the world is evil, that produces a kind of paranoia. Right? Anything other than what the cult leader tells me is bad, and it's worldly, and it's destructive. That can be reproduced, I think, and one of the things that Father Tom, you're mentioning, that can be reproduced in the online world, the world of conspiracy thinking, the world of paranoia thinking, right?
Right.
The online world is safe because it's just me and my screen. To step outside of the online world is to expose myself to all these vulnerabilities that come along with having a body. And if I could only just live in the online world and shut out the wrong kind of voices and even the beauty of the world, which just makes me more vulnerable, which I think is one of the dynamics that leads to this tension between romanticism and scrupulosity. The beauty of the world itself is a temptation.
Yeah, I honestly love that you said that the sort of the online world, but especially the conspiracy theories, this obsession with conspiracy theories, which of course online spreads like wildfire. I have long said, and I'm feeling a little proud of myself right now. I have long said this is a kind of Gnosticism, both because of what you said, that this is a kind of denial of the real world, where you enter into this conspiracy theory, but also it's a kind of special knowledge. It's a hidden knowledge, right? I know the truth and you don't know the truth. And I think it can become an obsession, and unfortunately, it can become a obsession even for Orthodox Christians that don't realize that this is a kind of Gnosticism. I really appreciate you saying that very, very much. All right, gentlemen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come right back, and when we come back, Robin, I would like to go deeply into the book. You have outlined certain areas of concern that question the relationship between the physical and the spiritual, such as the physical body, which you've talked about. But we're going to talk about other things too. So we're going to list all of those things. I want you both to help us unpack these areas. And again, if you are interested, and I hope you are, this is such a crucial book. People need to read this. It's called Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a manual for recovering Gnostics. It's published by Ancient Faith Publishing. Go to store.ancientfaith.com and purchase it now. You will not be harmed by this at all. You will be enlightened by this particular book. A lot of the popular misconceptions about the world are going to fall away, and you will get a truly Orthodox understanding of the goodness of creation. You are listening to Ancient Faith Today Live, and we will be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
I'm Robin Phillips, the Gnostic Buster at Ancient Faith. Did you know that God's kingdom is of this earth? Did you know that the resurrection totally changed history? Did you know that because of Christ's substitutionary atonement, we can build for God's kingdom? Did you know that as we participate in God's kingdom building work, we make the world a better place? If any of these questions surprise you, it could be because you have been unconsciously tinctured with some form of implicit Gnosticism. But that's okay. I used to be a Gnostic, and in my latest book, Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, I have shared my journey from Gnosticism to Orthodox Christianity. It's a journey I invite you all to travel with me.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once is Father Tom.
Welcome back. We are talking with author Robin Phillips and Dr. Phillip Cary of Eastern University. We're talking about Robin's new book, Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a manual for recovering Gnostics. This is a special pre-recorded edition of Ancient Faith Today Live, so you won't be able to call us, but I would love to hear from you, love to hear your feedback. You can always send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com or send a text to 412-206-5012. You can always do that anytime. All right. Robin, let's talk. In the introduction to your book, you cite these areas of confusion as the following: vocation, physical body, culture, ecology, worship, beauty, institutions versus relationships, and eschatology. Now, obviously, there's a lot there, and we have very limited time. But I'd like to go through, if you don't mind, each one and just give us your thoughts, both of you, about how one, what is a Gnostic view of, for instance, vocation, and what is a truly Christian biblical view of vocation. So let's start there. Robin, tell us what you might have thought as a Gnostic, if you will, an unassuming Gnostic, about vocation. What would be a Gnostic view of Christian vocation versus a truly Christian or Orthodox Christian view?
Yeah. So when it comes to problems in vocation, I don't want to stretch the term Gnosticism too far, but I mention vocation because it relates to how we relate to the earth, and particularly the jobs we perform in the earth. So, for example, this used to be more of a problem like in the 20th century, like with my parents' generation, but it still does sometimes persist that if you really want to serve God, you have to go into full-time ministry.
Right.
Because there's confusion about how to integrate our quote-unquote secular jobs with not just with our relationship with Christ, but with the work that God is doing in the world. So new creation already exists in the world in its inaugurated form. And what does that have to do with the day-to-day jobs that we perform? So that's what I was the question I'm trying to address here.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dr. Cary, do you have anything to add to that, just in terms of vocation? I really like what Robin said there, because as a priest, I'll have people come to me, and especially young men, they'll say, I want to be a priest. And maybe I don't feel like they have that gift, Right. But it's like, hey, you can be a good Christian plumber. Right. You can be a good Christian woodworker. You don't have to be a priest. You don't have to be a deacon. You can do these things as Christians and still be a sort of serve the kingdom of God.
And honor God, yes. I mean, be a car mechanic who's honest and competent, and people will be grateful to you for that.
Right.
So one of the problems that evangelicals have with their way of drawing a sharp line between the sacred and the secular is that everything outside of full-time Christian service starts looking like merely a secular job and not really Christian. Right. And that flows over into the attitudes towards art and beauty, because I don't know how many times I have heard evangelical Christians try to justify being artists, because somehow you have to have some kind of Christian justification for doing art and for caring about beautiful things. And it's so sad to hear that. Like, look, it's beautiful, it's well done, therefore it honors God. Beauty is its own justification, because the very beauty of things is a reflection of the beauty of God. You don't have anything beautiful that doesn't somehow reflect the beauty of God. So you don't have to sort of come up with some special spiritual Christian justification for it. You can just perceive it as beautiful, and therefore it is one of the things that God has done.
Right.
On the other hand, of course, one doesn't want to worship what is beautiful, right? Worship belongs to God alone. So the beauty is pointing beyond itself, even though it's its own justification, right? Beauty is good in and of itself, but it's not to be worshipped, and in its beauty, it also points beyond itself. It is, in a very, very broad sense, iconic. Icons are an especially intense version of that beauty, which is beautiful in and of itself and always points beyond itself. Once you get that about beauty, then you are free both from the romantic danger of worshiping beauty in itself and from this Gnostic danger of saying, oh, beauty is merely a temptation. I have to retreat back into my paranoid enclave and make sure that I stay away from the world.
Yeah. And going back to sort of more specifically about vocation and how people think of this, Father Alexander Schmemann, a great renowned Orthodox theologian of the previous century, he talks a lot about this and dismisses entirely that we could somehow separate the spiritual and the secular, right? He found this to be very artificial. And people do this all the time. They compartmentalize their lives, and they'll say, well, now I'm going to church on Sunday, and this is my spiritual life. Whereas when I go to work on Monday, this is my secular life. And they even maybe behave differently in these ways. And this causes a tremendous division in their life, a kind of, split personality in a way which can lead to sin and so forth. And I think having a holistic understanding of our world as just like ourselves, as both being spiritual and material, is very important for the way which we live our lives.
Right. I think, in fact, that the overemphasized split between spiritual and secular fits into the kind of Gnostic rejection of the body, because my body ends up becoming secular, and my spirit ends up becoming, super spiritual, and the body ends up being devalued precisely because the secular world ends up being devalued, right, as if the beauty of of God's creation doesn't reflect the beauty of God. And once you do that, you end up having an external world all around you that is devalued, or that is a temptation precisely because it's still beautiful, darn it, and I need to escape from that beauty and go into something purely spiritual.
Right. So, Robin, what about that? That's another point that you bring out in the book, is the physical body. And you talked about this previously in terms of cremation and so forth. How do Christians unknowingly fall into this kind of Gnosticism when it comes to their physical body? Because as a priest, I'm facing this right now. People are starting to say, well, Father, why aren't you allowing people to be cremated? Because, it's cheaper and the body turns to dust anyway. And so you're just hastening that. How would you answer this physical Gnosticism within the minds of some Christians?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's interesting that the questions of cremation are coming even into the Orthodox Church. I didn't realize
for sure.
that. That's interesting. Yeah, I like the what Philip said, clarifying how you have these two sides of the same coin. You have devaluation and idealization, and these are really two. They play off each other symbiotically. So so there's so much idealization of the body that we're bombarded with, and this goes hand in hand with sexualization of the body as well. And it's easy to react to that by like, oh yeah, we need to just dress like Amish, or anything to do with fashion or nice clothes or hairstyles must be bad. And then of course then you have the mutilation of the body as well. So I argue in the book, this might seem simplistic, but I'm willing to defend this, that the doctrine of resurrection is the answer to all of this, because the doctrine of physical resurrection, it both affirms the goodness of the material body, but it also affirms that the present order of the body is not the final reality. It's not the final locus of hope. So, and a lot of Christians, even people that were working with me on this project, were like, oh, I never realized that. I never realized that in the resurrection, I would have a renewed physical body. So,
right.
Very hugely important. Right.
It really is amazing the misconceptions that have crept into our culture as modern people, even as, a supposed maybe even post-Christian culture or whatever, but there's still a sort of like Christian memory. But this idea of how it creeps into the modern culture, the modern way in which we express things, the desire, for instance, for putting away of the body or mutilating the body has really at its heart this kind of Gnostic view. Gentlemen, I want to move forward because of the lateness of the hour. Can we move into culture and maybe even ecology and combine both of those things? Dr. Cary, when you hear the terms culture and worship, culture and ecology. We'll do worship in a second. Culture and ecology. What's happening there in the minds of young people, of people of the world, even heterodox Christians? In what way is culture and ecology coming out in a kind of Gnostic doctrine or Gnostic worldview?
Oh, well, yeah. Culture is what human beings do as they build homes and sing songs and also worship, right? There's a culture of worship. And as they garden and as they farm and so on. I think what's happening with the Gnostic culture in our culture is a form of technology, really, because technology is a form of power, and technology can be our servant, right? We can farm better with better implements. We can make music better when Stradivarius learns how to make great violins. The technology can be our servant, but it can also end up becoming our master. And right, and it ends up getting a life of its own, and then we think we have free choice when we're using the technology to shape the world around us according to whatever desire we happen to have, which turns out many of our desires are themselves the creation of a consumerist technology, a consumerist culture, which says what you want is to buy more things and to have more things, and you don't want to be reverent towards things. You want lots and lots and lots of things, right? So, for instance, in commercial Christmas, this is an example I've used. In commercial Christmas, we get all sorts of stuff, lots and lots and lots of stuff. In a time when we didn't have so much stuff that could be produced, mass-produced by our technology, a child might have one doll. And like Laura Ingalls Wilder had one little doll when she was growing up in a little house on the prairie. One doll. She loved that doll. She treasured that doll. She didn't have 36 dolls where none of them really mattered because they're all produced by machine, right? So we have this overproduction where physical things are so easy for us to control that we devalue them. We don't treat them with reverence. We don't treat them as having a beauty that deserves our esteem. And so the technology, precisely by giving us so much power over bodily things, ends up devaluing bodily things. And the only thing that matters now is our choice about how to use the technology, like maybe to modify our bodies and change our genders.
That's really fascinating. And if we could go on to the next subject too, Robin, and this one, ecology. I find this fascinating because this is such a divisive topic in our current American culture in 2023. So on the one hand, and I know we're talking about religious perspectives, but there's a kind of political divide, right? On the one hand, you have a conservative view that says, look, and maybe it goes back to what Dr. Cary was saying, like we're consuming the ecology. The earth is here to consume. And on the other hand, you have maybe a more what it would be politically liberal in American terms, where you have people that want to save the earth, right? And Mother Earth, and we have Earth Day, and we have a kind of worship of the earth. So, which one is the Gnostic perspective, or maybe both? Help us understand when you say ecology regarding a Gnostic view of it. What is that, and what is the truly Christian Orthodox biblical view? Robin?
Yeah. I like how you framed that question by showing just how weird this issue has become. I think a lot of the reason that a consumerist approach towards nature has been associated with quote unquote conservatism is because of the fear of communism for so long led people to extremes, and extreme version of capitalism that they're afraid of any type of limitation on or boundaries for industry. But it was interesting. I lived in England for 10 years, and in England, it's just part of the consciousness that you want to take care of the earth, and everyone recycles, and it was just like take it for granted. And then I moved to America, and it's just kind of, I moved back to America, and it hit me because I hadn't realized this before when I was in America. But suddenly, if you're a conservative, you're not in favor of protecting the environment because that ecology is the stuff that liberals are concerned about. And I'm intensifying the dichotomy with a stereotype, but only barely. And it was like, it would just really hit me. So like I crossed the ocean, and now suddenly being conservative means that you have to be pro-pollution and pro-gun.
Isn't it strange that conservatives, we now use the word, don't believe in conservation? Right? That's a very strange thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very strange. It is very strange, and so, but our theology.
Let me say one thing here, Robin, and I apologize for interrupting, but I probably triggered thousands of listeners right now because, I personally am a conservative. All right, politically, I'm deeply conservative. However, it's very interesting. I probably am not I'm not the greatest fan of recycling and so forth, but I know that there are certain things in our earth that are running out, like rare metals that are used in computers and so forth. So my younger daughters were shocked when I took all my old computer equipment and I took it to a recycling center, and I said, well, we're running out of these rare earths and we need them. So I don't want the conservatives that are listening to think that we're picking on the conservatives, and I don't want the liberals that are listening to think that we're picking on the liberals. We all need to think about these things very carefully and have a truly Christian view of ecology.
Yeah, I think we can actually pick on both of them, which might be one way of squaring this out. Good. To follow up on the conservative side, I mean, conservatism did used to mean conserving, right? And especially a certain kind of reverence toward the inheritance of the past. And that inheritance includes the fields and farms of our earth, which need to be taken care of well. Wendell Berry is a wonderful writer about this. But likewise, I remember being in Iceland on a stopover on an airplane flight, and they were very, very keen about recycling. And why? Because they have this relatively small island, and if they're not taking care of it, it goes to pot. They have to conserve the ecology of that fragile island. So part of what conservation does is it cares for the common good. And that's a phrase that conservatives should really care about, is the common good. So caring for the ecology is caring for the common good. That should be a conservative priority. But, of course, our politics is too perverse to allow that. The flip side, as liberals become increasingly progressive and even pagan, you do have you do have a kind of Mother Earth worship. You actually have people worshiping Gaia. You have people trying to reinvent pagan witchcraft and Wicca and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny about that is it's not really serious paganism. It's dilettantish. It's consumerist paganism. Because the nice thing about modern consumerist paganism is there's no real rules. Now in real paganism there's rules, right? Roman paganism, you had to do the rituals exactly right, or else it didn't count. But in consumerist paganism, you get to be whatever kind of witch or Wiccan or whatever, or goddess worshiper you want, right? Because there are no rules, there's no dogmas, right? There's no boundaries, right?
The ultimate libertarianism, like it's a libertinism, is really what it is, right?
Right. So that kind of liberalism is not really ultimately very liberal, just as the kind of conservatism that doesn't conserve isn't very conservative. Yeah.
Good point. All right, let's move on. And what we're going to do is let's combine the next two, because I think they go together very well. And that is worship and beauty. This is I think this should be a stark reality to especially Protestant Christians who eschew any kind of iconography, right? So, Robin, tell us in what ways beauty and worship are sort of belied in a Gnostic worldview. How is it that someone becomes unassumingly a Gnostic in the way that they worship, in the way that they see beauty? And what is the Orthodox biblical view?
Yes. Well, we have good examples here in America, and a lot of the churches that the Puritans produced. You just had whitewashed walls and very minimalist, and because how we worship always orients us towards certain Christologies and certain theologies, very hard to worship, to be steeped in that kind of tradition and not have Gnostic or even Docetic theology, maybe without even realizing. I mean, we're not saying that the Puritans were explicitly Gnostic, but there's an implicit operational Gnosticism that can be implicated by certain forms of worship. And one of the things that led me to Orthodoxy is just how much it engages the senses and the body, and that Christ actually reaches us through the actions we perform with our body. So one of the examples I give is kneeling. We would tend to think as modern people that I kneel as an expression, as a symptom of feeling penitent. But in the Orthodox view, and not just the Orthodox view, many Christians would agree with this, we kneel in order to become penitent. The postures and actions we perform in the body are actually formative in creating certain spiritual dispositions and even spiritual emotions.
Yeah. Indeed, because, for instance, I mean, the biblical terms that get translated worship are terms that most of them refer to bodily postures, right? Proskinesis in Greek is prostrating yourself, right? So what worship is bowing down or taking a knee or prostrating yourself before the great king. And that is something you don't do in a lot of quasi-Gnostic churches. There's quite a number of Protestant churches which you walk in them and they look like auditoriums. And in fact, some of them actually are auditoriums, right? There's people sitting in folding chairs, and there's no beauty to be seen with the eye. There might be music, there's usually music, but often it's very manipulative music. It's not about the beauty of the thing, it's about trying to create the right feelings. And because it's not embodied, because you're sitting in a chair and you're just alone with your own thoughts, because there's nothing to look at, and you can't really even look at your fellow worshipers, what ends up happening is it's very isolating. It's just you and your consciousness and your, but that's what spirituality means, right? If it's not embodied, it's also not social. So it's just you and your heart and your feelings. And there's an example of this that always drove me up a wall whenever I encountered it. There's a contemporary worship song that's sung by a lot of evangelicals, which says, "Here I am to worship." And it's very, very strange. You'll see a whole congregation of people singing, "Here I am to worship," as if each one of them is alone. No, it's a whole congregation worshiping together, right? It's not just I, right? But you will get that kind of isolation when you forget that you have a body and that the social environment with other human bodies in a place that ought to be beautiful is really an important part of worship. But you forget that, and then you end up just being alone. Yeah.
That is fascinating, and I think one only need to look at this idea of, and of course at the heart of all of this, right, is the goodness of creation as God created it. When he said, "It is good, it is good, it is good," he creates man, he says it's very good. And yet the disconnect between the incarnation of Christ, the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Christ, and then a worship which seems to deny all of that and this is the last topic we're going to talk about so that we can direct people to the book to read more and about more of these topics, and that is beauty. Robin, you started the show talking about your love of beauty, your love of and your admiration for beauty. Beauty certainly seems to be something that is present in creation, and it seems very odd that it would lead someone to a kind of distortion about the way that we think about beauty. In what way can someone be a Gnostic, and what is the way in which we should think about and appreciate beauty from a truly holistic and Christian and Orthodox standpoint?
Yeah, well, I have this image in the book of, it's more of an allegory. It's these turtles. I had to bring the turtles into it somehow. Well,
it's a wonderful passage. Yeah, go ahead and tell us about it.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, so these turtles are in the economy of design. They hatch on the full moon, but inland. And as long as they head towards the light of the moon, they'll make it to the safety of the ocean. But what's been happening is that lights from a nearby city in modern times redirects them. They follow the light of the city because it seems more immediate and accessible than the light of the moon, which is their proper telos. So that, to me, once I understood about the turtles, everything about beauty made sense, because the beauty is an icon, a pointer towards God. But when we fixate on counterfeit, there's two ways that things can go wrong. You can fixate on substitute beauty that mimics the beauty of God, or you can stop at genuine beauty and treat the icon, in the broadest sense of the term, as the ultimate source of our longings, rather than seeing what it is really pointing towards. And actually, Dr. Phillip Cary mentored me a lot about this when we were studying how this relates to Plato and Neoplatonism and the Confession. So I'm going to hand over to him to.
Yeah, that would be great. Dr. Cary?
Yeah, it's related to Romanticism, which is like a very late modern form of Platonism with a lot of stuff that's been dropped out. I mean, the Romantics are right that the world is beautiful, and that calls forth a certain kind of joy at the world that God created. But they tend to forget about God, and you end up worshiping beauty for its own sake. And not stopping and not going on to worship the archetype of the source of the beauty. It's like a turtle, should be following the moon. Instead, it's following the lights of the city. Now, the lights of the city are not inherently evil, but the turtle needs to understand where its desire is properly directed. Right? We've got this problem of disordered desire.
Very good.
Right? There are lots of beautiful women out there. Right? And that's something to admire and love. But, I belong to one woman, right? And my desire needs to be ordered and shaped and directed and disciplined toward that one woman who is my wife, which doesn't mean I have to deny that the other women are beautiful, right? That's great that there are beautiful women in the world, but only one of the beautiful women in the world is my wife. So follow the moon.
And it has to be a woman, not a man.
Right, it has to be a woman.
Yeah.
Let me say one more thing about beauty that's distinctively Christian, and it's especially accessible to the Orthodox, because the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, when it says, when God sees that the world is good, uses not the standard word for good, but the word for beauty, kalos. So you really could translate it from the Greek as God saw that the world was beautiful. Right? It's a word that can mean both beautiful and good, but God clearly appreciates and enjoys the good that he has made. Something like a great artist who steps back after he's finished with the sculpture or something and says, yeah, that's really good, right? I've done a wonderful job at that, right? That's kalos. But you can also get it wrong, because when the woman sees the tree in Genesis 3, she's not yet Eve, so she's just the woman, right? Adam's wife. She sees that the tree is kalos. The tree of good and evil is kalos. And that tempts her, right? Because the tree is good. All the trees that God made are good and kalos. But there's a time not to partake of what is good and kalos, right? There's lots and lots of these beautiful women out there. They are not for me. Right? Only one is for me. And when the tree is forbidden, even though it's beautiful, it's not for us, right? And that's an important lesson of ascesis, of asceticism and discipline. To get that discipline right and to see that it's oriented towards what is ultimately good is how you have a healthy relationship to the discipline of the body, as opposed to the unhealthy kind of thing you get in Gnosticism.
That's wonderful. Thank you both for joining us. This was such a wonderful conversation, very enlightening, and I'm so appreciative, Robin, that you wrote this book. This book is so important. It is really, in a way, explaining something and directing people. I love at the end of the book you talk about how not to be Gnostic. That's a really wonderful, helpful, practical part of the book that I think so many people are going to need, because they need to be open to be teachable, to help them understand and see who they are in Christ, who this or what this creation is, how they relate to it, how they relate to each other. And you've done such a great service to the church in explaining all of this. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful for your work. Robin, thank you for joining me. Dr. Cary, thank you very much for helping us in this conversation. I'm very, very sincerely grateful to both of you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you very, very much, gentlemen. We're going to close the program here. I want to offer my sincere thanks to author Robin Phillips, to Dr. Phillip Cary for joining us. Thanks to Matuszka Trudy for engineering our program, to our show production assistant Melissa Graff for her work behind the scenes. For everybody that's going to be listening to this program, we want to remind you to go to store.ancientfaith.com and order Rediscovering the Goodness of Creation, a manual for recovering Gnostics published by Ancient Faith Publishing. And remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program when it's posted, give us your feedback, and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. And join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today Live. Good night, everybody.
Linking the ancient Christian faith with modern technology. You're listening to internet-based Ancient Faith Radio.
New from Ancient Faith Publishing.
Secret Turning, a collection of short stories by Stephen Signori. So, I'm out in the lot of Lord of Heaven, and up comes Father Nahum from behind, grabs me.